Hold up. Imagine the Clone Wars without the Force. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that sounds completely impossible, until something crashes into the galaxy that doesn't play by Star Wars rules. And here's the crazy part, it doesn't just threaten the Republic, it changes what it even means to be a Jedi. So here's the dangerous question. What happens when the greatest warriors in the galaxy lose the one advantage they've always depended on? Trust me, this gets absolutely wild, and the ending is not what I expected. Check this out.
Palpatine read the first report twice, not because it was unclear, because it was clear in a way that required reading twice before he would accept what it was telling him, and he was not a man who accepted things slowly. He had spent 40 years training himself to accept truths immediately, to integrate them without the flinching delay that lesser minds use to protect themselves from difficult information. He read it twice. He set it down. He read the second report. He read the third and fourth simultaneously, which was a habit built from decades of managing a war while appearing to merely observe one, the ability to process multiple intelligence streams without showing the processing. He had done it 10,000 times. Reports from Geonosis, Camino, Christophsis, Mandalore, 100 other worlds where things were happening according to his design, and he read the reports the way a conductor read a score, finding each instrument where he expected it. These 4 reports were not his score. He set them down. He sat at his desk in the private office above the Senate Rotunda, the office that the Chancellor used for late-night work, quiet above a city of 1 trillion that never fully slept, and looked at the 4 reports arranged in front of him. 4 systems. 4 simultaneous events. 4 instances of the same impossible thing happening at the same moment in different places, which he knew was not coincidence because he had arranged enough non-coincidences in his life to recognize the architecture of genuine chance when it appeared. This was genuine chance. 4 rifts, 4 emergences, 4 reports from garrison commanders and fleet captains using language that had no precedent in any military communication he had received in 40 years of managing this war. Origin unidentified. Configuration unknown. Hostile without provocation. Advance continues regardless of casualties. All communication attempts ignored, requesting immediate clarification on rules of engagement for a contact that does not respond to standard escalation protocols. He looked at the last line of the 4th report, which the garrison commander on Felucia had added in a hand that was not quite steady. They don't stop. He extended his awareness through the dark side. He had done this 10,000 times too, reaching out through the Force, feeling the currents of fear and suffering and ambition that the war produced, reading the galaxy's emotional weather. He knew what wars felt like through the dark side. He had built one and had been feeling it for 3 years. What reached him from the 4 systems was not his war. It was not dark, not cold, not the crystallized hatred and suffering that the dark side ran on. What reached him was something that had never reached him before. Presence without darkness. Power without the specific psychic signature that power carried when it was rooted in emotion. It was loud in the Force the way thunder was loud, without malice, without direction, simply occupying every available space. He withdrew. He sat with his hands flat on the desk. The calculation he did with every new variable was automatic. How does this serve the plan? And if it doesn't serve the plan, how do I make it serve the plan? The calculation was running. It was not returning answers. He looked at the reports. He reached for his comm. In the Jedi Temple, Yoda was meditating. He had been meditating for 3 hours, which was not unusual, and had been meditating in this particular room for 20 years of mornings, which was also not unusual, and had been at peace in the way that 800 years of working at peace produced. The peace of someone who had found the same center so many times that finding it was automatic. The Wa field found him before he reached for it. He did not reach for it. He never reached for it. Across 6 weeks of its presence in the galaxy, it came to him the way a sound came, the way weather changed, without requiring permission or attention. It was simply there, and then it was louder. He opened his eyes. He sat with what he was feeling, in the way he sat with difficult things, not moving away from it, not toward it, present with it in the stillness that his particular kind of wisdom had learned was the most honest response to what you did not understand. The Wa field was not dark. He had established that immediately, in the first moment, and had been returning to the establishment daily because it mattered more than anything else about it. In 800 years of feeling the Force's currents, he had learned that the first fact about a thing was usually the thing that survived when everything else turned out to be wrong. not dark. Not the Force either, not exactly. Kin to it in some deep structural way. Both were belief made into something real. Both shaped reality through the pressure of genuine conviction. But kin the way a river was kin to rain. The same origin, different form, completely different experience. Alive, the way the Force was alive. And very, very loud. The Padawan who brought the morning reports found him sitting very still at the end of 3 hours, looking at the meditation room's window as the Coruscant dawn hit the upper spires, and ran down the building's face toward the lower levels that never saw direct light. Master Yoda? He looked at the Padawan. Something new, he said. In the Force. Something I have not felt before. 800 years. He had not said that about the Force in 800 years. He was not certain he had ever said it. He stood. The Council, he said. Now. The emergency council session had been running for 40 minutes before the combat reports began arriving. They came from the systems listed in the 4 intelligence reports Palpatine had read: Christophsis, Felucia, Ryloth, Rhodia, and they came in the specific rushed cadence of commanders who were in the middle of something and were reporting it between actions rather than after them. Master Windu read them as they came in, standing at the center of the council chamber, with his hands behind his back, and his expression doing the thing it did when he was integrating difficult information. Closed, focused. The face of someone who had decided that showing the difficulty was less useful than processing it. Multiple simultaneous incursions, he said. No hyperspace exits detected. The objects appeared through spatial anomalies that closed after transit. He looked at the council. The contact reports are consistent across all 4 systems. Organic beings, large, green-skinned, engaging Republic and Separatist forces alike, without distinction. Without distinction, Ki-Adi-Mundi said. They are not choosing sides, Windu said. They are attacking everything. Something without a side, Plo Koon said. In a war about sides. The Council absorbed this. What do the combat reports say about their capabilities? Adi Gallia asked. Windu looked at the latest report from Ryloth. Clone commanders described them as physically exceptional. Blaster fire is effective but not immediately incapacitating. Multiple shots required for confirmed kills. They advance through fire without breaking formation, though formation is not the right word for how they move. He looked up. One commander writes, they move like the fight is where they want to be, not where they have to be. Silence in the chamber. Yoda looked at his hands. Feel them, can you? He said to the council. In the Force. Several council members had clearly been waiting to say something about this, and had been waiting for Yoda to open it. I felt something when I extended toward the Felucia system, Plo Koon said. Not darkness, not light. He searched for the right description. Interference. The way a large magnetic field interfered with sensitive instruments. Not damaging, just present and overwhelming. That is the right word, Yoda said. Overwhelming. What is it? Windu said. Not a question about what he felt, a question about what the thing was. Yoda looked at him. Do not know yet, he said, but this, not of the dark side it is. Threatening, yes. Evil, perhaps not. Dangerous, certainly. He looked at the reports on the chamber's central display. Fighting them, we can. Understanding them. Time, that will take. Windu nodded once, the specific nod of a man who had been hoping for a cleaner answer, and was accepting the honest one. Deploy Skywalker to Ryloth, he said. Kenobi to Umbara, there's a Separatist engagement already in progress there that the Wa has complicated. I'll take Felucia personally. He looked at the council. We need combat assessment from our best people. Whatever these beings are, we need to understand them before we can fight them effectively. One other thing, he said. He looked at the reports. The Council should know that every Jedi who has had extended proximity to these beings reports the same difficulty. Force sensitivity is compromised at close range. Not eliminated, compromised. He looked at Yoda. We're going in partially blind. Yoda looked at the window. Then see clearly with our eyes, he said, and trust what training has built. Enough. It will have to be. On Christophsis, Commander Colt had stopped expecting the situation to make sense 20 minutes ago, and had moved into the operating mode that 3 years of Clone Wars had built in him. Deal with what's in front of you. Keep the unit intact. Report what you see accurately. What was in front of him was 2 problems that had recently become 1 problem. The Separatist assault from the east. standard droid formations, B1s and B2s, pushing through the Crystal City's outer districts with the grinding mechanical persistence of an army that didn't feel attrition and was being sent forward by a tactical calculus rather than by urgency. The wah! From the west, the sound arrived before anything else, a frequency that was below tactical and above the silence between actions, and that built and built without apparently reaching a ceiling. He had split his formation and held both fronts for 19 minutes. Then the Orks hit the Separatist flank. He watched it happen on his tactical display, and then on the visual feed, and then with his own eyes, as the sounds of two separate engagements merged into one, and the merged engagement was louder than either had been alone. Beside him, a trooper named Boost was watching the same thing. "The clankers are getting hit from behind," Boost said. "I see it. The Orks aren't communicating with us." "No, but they're hitting the clankers." "Also no," Colt said. "They're hitting whatever's closest to them. The clankers are just closer." Boost looked at the tactical display. "So they're not on our side." "They're not on anyone's side," Colt said. Boost absorbed this for a moment. "That's actually worse, isn't it?" he said. "Significantly," Colt said. He watched the merged engagement on the display, the organized droid formations losing coherence as something hit them from behind that did not behave like any military force he had been trained to understand. Not a flanking maneuver, not a hammer and anvil. Just momentum, enormous and enthusiastic, crashing into the droid lines because the droid lines were there. The droids started falling back. Not a tactical retreat, a disruption withdrawal, the specific movement of a formation that had lost the structural integrity required to maintain its objectives. Colt looked at the gap this was opening in the Separatist line. He made a decision. "All units, Eastern advance," he said. 3 minutes, no more. We push through the gap and pull back before the Orks reorient." "If they reorient to us," his second started. "Then we deal with it," Colt said. "But right now they're busy with the clankers and the gap is there." He picked up his DC-17. "Move." The clone formation moved. They went through the gap in 40 seconds. They hit the Separatist positions with the precision of soldiers who had been doing this for 3 years and found those positions in the specific disorder of a formation fighting 2 directions simultaneously. They secured the eastern ridge in 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Then Colt looked back at where the Orks were. The Orks were done with the droids, not because the droids were defeated, because the droids had run, and running things were unsatisfying to chase when there was already a perfectly good fight available. The Orks looked at the eastern ridge. The eastern ridge was now full of Republic clone troopers. The Orks made the sound. "Back," Colt said. "Now. New formation, 2 fronts." They ran. Behind them, the wah hit the eastern ridge with the enthusiasm of something that had just found a more interesting target and was delighted by the upgrade. Colt got his unit to the secondary defensive line and turned and started shooting. He sent a report up the chain as he fired. Tactical note: the Orks will engage anything. This can be useful for approximately 30 seconds before it becomes your problem. Do not confuse their attacking your enemy with being your ally. Recommend all commanders treat them as a third hostile force, regardless of who they appear to be targeting at any given moment. He looked at the wave coming toward his line. He kept shooting. Urgok the Unstoppable arrived on Christophsis personally at the end of the first week, because the reports from his boys were enthusiastic in ways that made personal inspection mandatory. He stood at the edge of the Crystal City's outer district. The crystals caught the planet's sunlight and scattered it in colors that even Urgok found distracting in an aesthetic way, though he would not have used the word aesthetic, and looked at what his wah had been doing. Graka was beside him, carrying 3 things simultaneously: a captured Republic blaster that he was taking apart while walking, a datapad covered in diagrams that no non-orc could have interpreted, and a piece of something that had been part of a battle droid until Graka's curiosity encountered it. "Well?" Urgok said. Graka considered. "Da Republic things are good," he said. "Da metal things are bad." He held up the droid component. "Dis stops working when you hit it. Not supposed to stop working when you hit it. What's the point?" "No point," Urgok said. "That's why they're boring." "Could make 'em better," Graka said. Urgok looked at him. Graka looked at the droid component with the specific expression of a mech boy who had just had an idea that he couldn't let go of. "Don't," Urgok said. "Just a few changes," Graka said. "Da power rerouting alone." We didn't come here to fix da metal boys, Urgok said. We came here for da fight. Yeah, but imagine, Graka said, if the metal boys were worth fighting. Urgok opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the Crystal City. Somewhere in there, or on one of the other 3 worlds, was the Angry One, the fast Jedi who moved like the fight was happening before it started, and who had given him a scar he was proud of, and who Urgok was already looking forward to finding again, with the deep, uncomplicated anticipation of a being whose wants were entirely honest. Don't touch the metal boys, he said finally. Graka made a sound that was not agreement. Urgok decided to count it as agreement. He looked at the Crystal City. Find me a proper fight, he said. He walked toward the city. Behind him, Graka looked at the droid component. He put it in his pocket. Anakin's hand moved toward the tactical display and stopped halfway there because the Wa field had suddenly intensified enough that he couldn't think clearly past it. Not pain, not dark side corruption. Something that sat at the edge of his force awareness like a frequency too low to hear, but loud enough to vibrate through everything else. And the vibration was getting worse the closer his forces pushed toward the sound's origin. Rex was shouting something about positions. Anakin turned toward him. The world tilted sideways and corrected itself, which meant the world had not tilted at all. His balance had been disrupted by the specific sensory overload of fighting without the Force's normal stabilizing presence. His lightsaber came up anyway because muscle memory did not require the Force, and 3 years of Clone Wars had built the muscle very deep. An orc knob hit his guard from an angle Anakin's reflexes had read too late. The impact traveled up his arm as pure physical force. No warning, no Force sense anticipation. He had encountered that specific moment once before, on a day that had not ended well, and his body remembered it better than his mind did, and reacted with the specific violence of someone who had learned that hesitation in that situation produced blood. He cut. The knob went down. Anakin stood over the body and felt his own heartbeat in his throat, and realized that his first instinct was not to extend through the Force and assess the battle. His first instinct was to breathe and come back into his body, because the body was all he had right now and it was screaming. He looked at the ridge. At clone troopers holding position with the disciplined precision that 3 years of war had built into them. At orc boys taking fire and not stopping and not slowing. At the specific moment when a military situation became a catastrophe, not because one side was superior, but because one side had stopped understanding what it was doing and had moved into pure reaction. He activated his comm. "Rex," he said. The captain was beside him in seconds, moving with the specific economy of someone who had learned to run and shoot and think simultaneously. "Sir," Rex said. "Hold position," Anakin said. "Do not advance into the Wa field's direct vicinity." "They're pushing through our line," Rex said. "I know." Anakin looked at the advancing orcs. "That's not your problem right now. Your problem is keeping your people alive." He looked at Rex. "Can you do that?" Rex looked at the ridge, at the numbers, at the specific tactical situation that no amount of training prepared you for, because the training assumed you would have information, and he didn't. "Yes," he said. Anakin moved, not forward, toward the highest ground overlooking the engagement. He needed elevation. He needed distance from the Wa field's immediate vicinity. He needed to think in the way that the Force allowed when you could find enough space to hear it. An orc intercepted him halfway up the ridge. Not deliberately. The orc was moving through the battlefield in the direction of the nearest fight, and Anakin was moving through the battlefield for a different reason, and their paths crossed, and the orc made the specific decision that any orc made when encountering a being that looked like it could provide a good fight. It fought him. They met on the slope. The orc was 2.5 meters tall, and moved with the specific confidence of a being that had never encountered an opponent it couldn't overcome through sheer physical capability. The lightsaber was new to it. Orcs had weapons, multiple weapons, all of them crude and brutal and somehow functional, and it registered the lightsaber as interesting. It tried to grab it. Anakin moved the blade, and the orc's hand intercepted the edge instead, and came away cleanly, and the orc looked at the stump, with the specific expression of something that was already growing the hand back, and considered this a fair trade for a good fight. The second strike Anakin threw found the orc in the chest. The orc looked down at the wound. It looked at Anakin. Then it continued forward because stopping was not part of the equation. Pain was not stopping it. Bleeding was not stopping it. The only thing that would stop it was death, and Anakin was going to have to provide that multiple times over before the message took. Anakin killed it. Then he killed the next one that arrived. Then the one after that. He got to the high ground by moving through 7 consecutive fights that should not have been survivable, and only were because Anakin Skywalker's specific gift was the ability to be exactly where he needed to be, in the moment he needed to be there, and his body could do that without requiring the Force to tell it how. He reached the summit of the ridge. He stopped. He looked down at the engagement below. His clone troopers were holding, barely. The Orks were not stopping. The situation was deteriorating with the specific inevitability of a military problem that had no military solution, and Anakin's mind, which had spent 3 years solving military problems through the application of force sensitivity plus tactical understanding, plus the capacity to be a one-man army of one if required, was looking at this specific situation and finding the specific fact that no amount of training had prepared him for. He could not solve this through superiority. He could only solve it through presence. He pulled his comm toward his mouth. "All units, fall back to secondary defensive positions," he said. "Full retreat. Do not hold ground. Save the men." The response came back in the clipped tones of Rex acknowledging orders. Anakin looked down at the battlefield. He looked at the Orks. He extended toward them through the Force. He found the same thing he had found every time he reached into their collective presence. Noise. Enormous, genuine, not hostile in the Force sense noise, like trying to navigate by starlight in a room that a supernova was occupying. He pulled back. He picked up his lightsaber and went to hold the line while his troops retreated. Obi-Wan's meditation was not meditation. It was the thing you did when your mind needed to be in the same place as your body, and your body was in a war, and your mind would not stop thinking about things it should not have been thinking about. He sat in a commandeered Separatist building on Umbara, because Umbara was the one place where the eternal darkness meant meditation required an internal light source rather than an external one, and the darkness had always suited the specific clarity that Obi-Wan required when he was working through something difficult. He was working through something difficult. The difficulty was not the Orks themselves. He had seen the combat reports. He had integrated the data. He understood the tactical situation and had already begun developing responses that would mitigate the problems the posed to standard Jedi combat doctrine. The difficulty was underneath the tactical situation. He extended through the Force toward the nearest Ork concentration. The field reached back. Not aggressively. Not in the way that dark side entities reached back when you reached toward them, with the cold specific intention to harm or corrupt or draw you into darkness. The field reached back the way water reached if you extended into it. Present, undeniable, not shaped by your presence but moved by it. Obi-Wan pulled back. He had done this meditation 4 times since arriving on Umbara. He had arrived at the same conclusion each time. The Force was not the only way to understand the galaxy. This should not have been surprising. 8,000 years of Jedi history contained examples of beings who operated outside Force sensitivity. Some ancient civilizations, some purely organic cultures that had not developed Force awareness, some technological entities that perceived the galaxy through sensors rather than sensory organs. But they were rare. And they had never been a military threat to the Jedi Order while the Jedi Order was at full strength. These were. Obi-Wan opened his eyes. He stood. He picked up his lightsaber, because standing in a war zone without a weapon was not philosophical consistency, it was ineffective. He walked back toward the engagement. Behind him, the meditation chamber's darkness settled back into its normal permanent state, the specific dark of a world that had learned to live without much light and had become quite good at it. Mace Windu was the Republic's greatest warrior and was currently discovering what it meant for that claim to encounter an exception. Vapad was not mysticism, it was technique. Pure, executable, tested repeatedly technique, the specific method by which a warrior who had studied darkness could take the opponent's aggression and their darkness and their violent intent and redirect it through their own system and back at the opponent without being corrupted by it. Mace had perfected it across 40 years. He had never encountered an opponent whose aggression had no darkness in it. The Ork war boss in front of him, not Urgok, a lieutenant, a being 3 meters tall that had taken 3 hits from Mace's lightsaber and was still advancing with the specific enthusiasm of something that was having the time of its life, had violence but not darkness. Had aggression but not malice. Had the intention to harm but not the intention to corrupt or control or dominate in any way that the Force could read as darkness. Mace's blade met the Ork's weapon, and the contact point produced nothing that Vapad could work with. There was no darkness to redirect. There was just force meeting force, and the Ork's force was larger and slower, but committed in ways that Mace's superior speed and technique could not find leverage against, because leverage in Vapad required something to redirect toward, and the Ork's violence was going to go exactly where the Ork intended, no matter what Mace did to reshape it. He was going to have to win through pure combat superiority. He adjusted. His blade moved from redirection pattern into pure cutting pattern, the specific flow that did not rely on channeling the opponent's energy, but rather on being exactly faster and more precise than the opponent could match. The Ork hit him. The hit was not fast. It was not sophisticated. It was a being 3 meters tall, weighing 400 kilograms, swinging a weapon forged from crude metal and belief, and Mace Windu experienced, in that moment, the specific sensation of being hit by something that could genuinely hurt him. His defense held. His arm stayed where it was. His lightsaber came back to position for the follow-through. But the follow-through cost him something to execute, because cost was part of the equation now, and Vapad worked best when cost was not part of the equation. He killed the Ork. He stood over the body and was breathing harder than he had breathed in a long time. An aide was beside him, one of the clone commanders, Cody, moving with the specific velocity of someone who had watched their general take a hit and needed to assess damage. "General Windu," Cody said. Mace looked at him. "Report," Mace said. "The Orks have taken 3 city districts," Cody said. "Republic forces holding at the 4th sector defensive line. Casualties are..." Cody looked at his datapad. "Significant." Mace looked at the sector maps. At a military situation deteriorating with the specific inevitability of a force meeting an opponent it did not have doctrine for. He activated his comm. "Master Yoda," he said, "it's Windu. I need to report something about the Orks, something that changes everything about how we approach them." The response came back. "On Council channel, are you?" "Switching now," Mace said. He opened the full Council frequency. "Skywalker," he said. "Kenobi. I need to know if you experienced the same thing I just experienced when engaging Ork opposition." Anakin's voice came back, tired. My hand moved, and I didn't tell it to. My reflexes were moving without the Force telling them to move. It was close. Obi-Wan's voice. "I cannot read them. Not as dark side, not as anything. It's like reaching toward them in the Force and finding a frequency that the Force was not built to interpret." Mace looked at the Ork he had just killed. "They're not dark side," he said. "They're not corrupted. They're just not there. Not in the way that the Force can see. Which means..." He stopped. "Which means everything we have built our combat doctrine on does not apply," Yoda said. Master Yoda's voice on the channel, carrying the weight of 800 years of understanding something he had just realized was incomplete. The channel was quiet. "New doctrine we must develop," Yoda said, quickly. Palpatine received the report from Count Dooku at approximately the moment that Mace was standing over the dead Ork war boss, and Yoda was saying the words, "New doctrine we must develop." The report came through the encrypted channel that Dooku maintained for communications that Sidious wanted to exist, but wanted to deny existed. The channel that every Sith apprentice eventually realized was a specific kind of leash, because the Master always kept records of the apprentice's true position. Dooku's voice was controlled. "The Wa has become a problem that the Separatist military cannot address independently," Dooku said. "We are losing territory at an accelerating rate. I estimate 6 months before the primary Separatist production worlds are overrun, if the current trajectory continues." Palpatine listened. "I am requesting authorization," Dooku continued, "to coordinate with Republic military forces against the Wag threat. The alternative is complete loss of Separatist territory, at which point the war itself becomes irrelevant." Palpatine set the message aside. He did not respond immediately because immediate response was not always the most useful response. He sat with what Dooku was telling him, and what Dooku was asking, and what the specific political cascade of answering yes would produce. Yes meant accepting that the war needed to continue at a different tempo than he had designed for. Yes meant the Separatists and Republic would coordinate, which meant the specific, carefully managed opposition between them would soften. Yes meant he was no longer controlling both sides of the conflict. Yes meant the Orks had disrupted his plan in the most fundamental way possible, not by defeating him, but by forcing him to be honest about the situation's parameters. He picked up the encrypted comm. Denied, he said. Continue operations against the WAV, independently. Do not coordinate with the Republic. He closed the channel. He sat with the silence of the office. He opened it again. Dooku, he said. Disregard previous instruction. You are authorized to coordinate with the Jedi General Command at a tactical level. Limit coordination to operations only. This authorization exists for 30 days. He closed the channel. He sat with the weight of the decision. He had spent 40 years managing a war through the manipulation of both sides. He had spent 3 years perfecting the equilibrium. He had accumulated power through the precision of the application of force, using violence as a tool and tragedy as the fuel for the emotions that the dark side ran on. The Orks did not understand manipulation. The Orks did not understand tragedy. The Orks understood only one thing, and they understood it completely. He looked at the reports. He made a second decision. He initiated a session with the Jedi Council and prepared to tell them something he had never told them before. He was going to give them what they needed to win. Not the war, the specific crisis. He was going to give the Jedi real resources, real intelligence, real coordination authority. Not the careful rationed resources he had been providing while ensuring neither side got enough to achieve complete victory. He was going to give them enough to win against the Orks. The reason was strategic. The reason was that uncontrolled variables were the only thing he had ever been genuinely afraid of, and the Orks were the most uncontrolled variable that had ever occupied his galaxy. The other reason, the one he did not articulate to himself because articulation was dangerous, was that he was looking at a war he could not win through manipulation, and for the first time in 40 years was looking at the option of winning it through honest victory. He did not like the option. He was going to take it anyway. He opened a new secure channel. Senators Organa and Amidala, he said. I need to call a combined emergency session. Military coordination against extraterrestrial threat. He paused. And I need to know the current status of all Republic military assets we can deploy in the next week. The responses came back. Compliance, acknowledgement. The specific, efficient machinery of a Republic that could still move when crisis required it. Palpatine sat with his hands on his desk and felt the specific strange sensation of letting go of something he had held for 40 years. Control was being removed from him. He was removing it himself.
The enemy fleet is advancing. All wings engage.
Wait, did you catch that? Palpatine just lost control, and the Orks haven't even reached their peak yet.
The victory was going to be the Republic's. He was going to ensure it. And somewhere in the wreckage of the plan when this was over, he was going to have to figure out what you did when the only variable you could not manipulate was the variable that had replaced the one you built your entire plan around. Urgok the Unstoppable sat on top of a destroyed ATTE and evaluated the situation with the specific clarity that 300 years of continuous warfare had produced in him. The fight was good. The clones were proper soldiers. They came in numbers, they kept shooting even when it hurt them, they moved in coordinated patterns that suggested someone in their hierarchy actually understood the concept of organized violence. This was satisfying. Urgok respected this. The Jedi were excellent. The angry young one especially. Fast in the way that things were fast when they had been training to be fast since they were small, and carrying a weapon that actually cut through Ork biology in interesting ways. Urgok was acquiring scars from the Jedi encounters, and the scars were good quality. They healed slow enough that you noticed them, which meant the injury had been serious enough to register. The robots were disappointing. This was the core problem with the situation, as Urgok assessed it while sitting on top of destroyed heavy armor and watching his boys consolidate the ridge they had just taken. The robots did not bleed. They did not feel pain. They did not have the specific relationship with violence that came from a body that could be hurt and could hurt back, and understood both possibilities intimately. You could cut a robot in half and it stopped working, but it did not understand stopping. It did not feel the failure. It was just finished. Urgok wanted to talk to Graka about this. He found Graka in one of the captured clone bases, surrounded by pieces of Republic technology, and wearing the specific expression of a mech boy who had discovered something that he could not stop thinking about. Graka was working on a clone blaster rifle that he had taken apart so completely that it no longer resembled anything that had a function. Spread out around him were the components: trigger assembly, energy cell connector, barrel chamber, all of it examined with the intensity of an engineer who was looking for something specific in the design and had not found it yet. They are good, Graka said without looking up. Really well made. Someone who understood what a gun needed to do designed Dise. Urgok sat down, which on an orc of his size meant establishing a position rather than a simple chair. A heavy piece of destroyed wall sufficed. Da problem, Urgok said, is the metal boys. Graka looked up. They don't care if they lose, Urgok said. They don't care if they get hit. They just stop. There is nothing under it. No person deciding to keep going even though it hurts. Just gears and logic and no actual fightiness. Graka looked at the rifle components. Yeah, he said. That's why they're boring. Can you fix that? Urgok said. Graka looked at him. Fix it how? Graka said. Make 'em orcish. Yeah. Graka considered. He looked at the rifle. He looked at Urgok. He looked back at the rifle. Maybe, he said. If I had time, if I had the right materials, if I understood how they think about machines instead of just how they build them. He picked up the barrel assembly. Could I make a better gun? Yeah. Could I make a gun that actually wants to fight instead of just does what it's told? He set the barrel down. That's different. That's harder. Urgok nodded. He understood. Making a thing bigger was easy. Making a thing better was harder. Making a thing alive in the specific way that things needed to be alive to be worth fighting was the hardest thing of all. Don't worry about it, Urgok said. We got enough fight from the clones and the Jedi. Graka made a noise that was not quite acceptance. Urgok decided to count it as acceptance and moved on. The field problem. Buzzgob was having a bad week and was becoming aware that the bad week was about to get worse. A weird boy's job was to channel the field, to take the collective psychic energy that 10,000 orcs generated through their shared belief in fighting and to amplify it, to make it visible, to turn it into something that could be directed. At small scales, this was manageable. At medium scales, it was difficult. At large scales, it became something that the weird boy carried rather than controlled. Urgok's had been growing. New orcs arrived every week as the spores from the arrived orcs germinated on the worlds they had conquered, producing fresh fighting-ready boys that immediately joined the nearest fight, and the nearest fight was usually the main The field was intensifying. The intensification was producing effects that Buzzgob had not prepared for. The first effect was involuntary discharge. The field would build up enough that Buzzgob's body would just start emitting it without his choosing to emit it. A bolt of raw energy would go off in a direction he was not aiming at and would hit something that might or might not have needed hitting. This was frustrating for everyone involved. The second effect was that the field was starting to produce resonance with things that should not have resonated with it. Republic equipment was malfunctioning in unpredictable ways. Clone trooper neural implants, the communication devices embedded in their brains, the things that kept them connected to their commanders, were interfering with the field, and the field was interfering with them, producing feedback loops where the trooper would get a message, the message would distort through the field, and the distorted message would arrive at the other end carrying information that it should not have been carrying. On a world that was actively engaged in combat, this was becoming a structural problem. The third effect was the one Buzzgob was genuinely worried about. The field was growing beyond the boundaries of the itself.
This is actually my favorite twist so far. The Force isn't gone, it just isn't enough anymore.
He could feel it. From his position at the center of Urgok's forces, he could feel the field extending outward in a radius that was expanding every week as more orcs arrived, and more fighting happened, and more of everything that made the field stronger accumulated. The field was now affecting Force sensitives at distances that should not have been possible for a purely local phenomenon. The Jedi were complaining. Not to him, he was never going to hear what the Jedi complained about directly, but the reports were getting back through the captured Republic communications, and the Jedi were having trouble with their specific Force-sensing abilities at increasing distance from the center. This was significant because Buzzgob, for all his other limitations, understood psychic phenomena better than most orcs. He understood that you could not scale something indefinitely without changing what it was. A field strong enough to affect Force sensitivity across an entire sector was not the same thing as a field that affected it at close range. It was something different, something that was becoming active in new ways that nobody had accounted for. He reported this to Urgok. Urgok listened. Urgok considered. Is it a problem? Urgok asked. Dunno yet, Buzzgob said. It's definitely something. Urgok nodded. Keep doing what you're doing, he said. Tell me if it stops being manageable. Buzzgob decided to accept this as permission to worry in private, and went back to his position and tried to find a way to channel a field that was growing beyond his ability to measure accurately. The Separatist coordination problem. Count Dooku received the authorization to coordinate with Republic forces approximately 3 hours after he had sent the request, and 2 hours after he had assumed the authorization would be denied. The authorization came with specific parameters: 30 days, WABIS operations only, limited to tactical coordination with Jedi General Command. Dooku understood what the parameters meant. They meant the Chancellor was frightened enough to break his own operational security for a 30-day window to see if an alliance could contain the threat. They meant that Sidious had calculated that the WA was the bigger problem than the carefully managed opposition between the Republic and Separatists. They meant that Dooku's problem was about to become significantly more complicated because now he would be working with Republic military, and the Republic military would be watching him, and the coordination would require that he actually help them win, which meant his specific position of appearing to serve Sidious while planning his eventual survival would be harder to maintain. He accepted the parameters. He activated his secure channel to Jedi General Command. This is Count Dooku, he said. I am transmitting my current intelligence on WAG formations, supply lines, and movement patterns. I am also providing my assessment of their tactical capabilities based on engagements my forces have sustained. One quote. The response came back from Obi-Wan Kenobi. Received, Count. This is a significant development. We will coordinate on the Felucia Theater first. Dooku closed the channel. He sat with the weight of the decision. He was now, technically, helping the Republic win. He was doing it for survival, and for the specific calculation that Sidious's plan could not proceed if the Orks consumed the galaxy first. He was doing it for tactical advantage. Separatist worlds allied with Republic forces against the Orks were Separatist worlds that survived. He was not doing it for the stated purpose, the philosophical conflict between democracy and independence that had justified the entire war. The irony was significant enough that he noted it in his personal records for future philosophical consideration, which was the closest thing to a laugh that Dooku permitted himself. He began compiling additional intelligence for transmission. Rex's question, again. Clone Captain Rex sat with his back against a destroyed wall and looked at the trooper sitting beside him. Kix, his medic, who had acquired the specific quality of someone who appeared whenever people needed someone to sit with, and asked the question again, because the first time he had asked it, the answer had not settled anything. What are we fighting for? Rex said. Kix looked at him. The Republic, Kix said. The people we protect. The Orks aren't fighting for anything, Rex said. They're just fighting, and they're happy about it. Kix considered this. Are you unhappy about it? Kix said. Rex looked at his hands. At the marks they bore. At the specific wear that holding a blaster and gripping armor and climbing through destroyed buildings produced over 3 years of continuous war. At the evidence of everything he had done and everyone he had done it for, and the specific nagging question of whether the doing was the point or whether the for was the point. I don't know, Rex said. 3 years ago I didn't have a question about it. I was made to fight. That was the point. That was enough. He looked at Kix. But then I started having thoughts that weren't issued to me. I started caring about things that weren't on my orders. I started becoming something other than just a soldier. He looked at his hands. And now I'm looking at the Orks, and they're just soldiers. That's all they are. And they're satisfied in a way that I can't remember ever being satisfied. And I don't know if that means I'm better than them for wanting something else, or if it means I'm broken, because the thing I was made for should be enough, and it's not. Kix was quiet for a long time. If you were just a soldier, Kix said finally, you wouldn't be asking that question. That's not an answer, Rex said. No, Kix said. It's not, but it's something. Rex looked at the ridge where another engagement was beginning. At clone troopers taking position, at Orks advancing with the specific enthusiasm of beings that had no doubt about what they were and what they were supposed to be doing. He picked up his blaster. He moved to position. He kept the question with him, because the question was not going away, and soldiers who had learned to think were soldiers who carried questions like luggage. Urgok's assessment, final. Urgok stood on the highest point in the captured territory, and looked out at the geography of the war he had found himself in. 4 separate WOGs, arriving in 4 separate systems. Urgok's was the largest, but not by orders of magnitude. The other war bosses were having good fights too, taking worlds, consolidating territory, building the kind of momentum that felt good when you could feel it building under you. The Republic was coordinating. He could feel it. The specific change in how they were deploying, the way the Jedi were moving with more precision, the way the clone formations were becoming more sophisticated in response to what they had learned about fighting orcs. They were getting better. This was satisfying. Better opponents made for better fights, and Urgok's purpose was to have the best fights possible. If the Republic could make that possible by learning and adapting and pushing back harder, that was exactly what Urgok wanted from them. The Separatists were coordinating with the Republic. This was interesting. 2 sides of a war that had been fighting each other for 3 years were now fighting together against a third thing. Urgok understood this at the level of pure combat logic. When you encountered a bigger threat, you did not keep fighting the old enemy. You dealt with the new threat first. This was smart. He approved. His Wah field was growing stronger. He could feel it. The collective strength of increasing numbers, the intensification of the field as more orcs joined and more fights happened. The field was becoming something that was affecting things it shouldn't have been affecting. The Jedi reported disruption to their specific force-sensing abilities at distances that seemed too far away for that to make sense. Graka said the field was becoming powerful enough to interface with technology in ways that technology was not designed for. Buzzgob said the field was starting to resonate with things that were not orcs. Urgok noted all of this. He continued fighting, because the fight was the point, and the fight was available, and as long as the fight was available, the fight was what mattered. Everything else, the growing field, the scaling effect, the increasing complexity of what the Wah was becoming, everything else was secondary to the continuing fight. He looked at the horizon. Somewhere out there was the angry Jedi, the fast one, the one who had given him good scars and who fought like the fight mattered. The one Urgok wanted to meet again in a context where they could actually finish the engagement instead of being interrupted by the larger movements of battle. Urgok was patient in the way that beings who genuinely wanted something could be patient. He would find him. And when they fought again, it would be better, because both of them would be better at it. This was something to look forward to. Urgok looked forward to it with the deep, uncomplicated enthusiasm of a being whose wants were entirely honest and entirely possible.
Okay, can we talk about how insane this has become? I'm over here thinking this is going to be another good guys versus bad guys crossover. And now the Jedi are rewriting thousands of years of combat doctrine, while the clones are having an existential crisis. Meanwhile, the orcs are just having the best week of their lives. Seriously, if the WAG keeps growing, what does the galaxy even look like a month from now? Trust me, the second half flips this story again. Here's the part that blew my mind. The most dangerous weapon in this crossover isn't an orc axe or a lightsaber. It's a battlefield that slowly turns the Force into an unreliable advantage. That's terrifying.
Palpatine sat in the Senate chamber during an emergency session and discovered something he had never discovered before in 40 years of political manipulation. The precise moment when control slipped through your fingers because you had chosen to release it. The Senate was voting on emergency military appropriations. The funding was going to the Republic's military expansion, ships, weapons, clone trooper accelerated breeding programs, all of it designed to mount a coordinated response against the Wah threat. The vote was not close. Every senator understood what uncontrolled orc expansion meant, and what it meant was that the careful balance of interests that Palpatine had been managing, playing loyalists against separatists, funneling money to both sides to ensure the war continued at optimum tempo, had become irrelevant. The money was flowing to actual victory. He had authorized it. He watched the vote total accumulate and felt the specific sensation of having moved a game piece and realizing that the piece had agency he had not accounted for. The piece was moving in the direction he intended, but it was moving on its own momentum now, and the momentum was not something he could adjust without disrupting the entire structure. Senator Organa was speaking. The orc threat represents a challenge to civilization itself, Organa said. The kind old man, speaking with the careful precision of someone who believed what he was saying. We cannot afford ideological conflict when our survival is in question. The Emergency Powers Act grants the Chancellor authority to coordinate all military resources against this threat. We should exercise those powers fully. Palpatine voted in favor of the bill. It passed. He watched it pass and made the specific internal calculation. He had just given himself the authority to do what he should have been able to do 3 months ago. He had just removed the specific procedural constraints that had forced him to manage the war through manipulation, because now the war could be managed through direct command. He had also just removed his greatest source of power. The power had never been in the war itself. The power had been in knowing what every faction wanted and being the only person who could appear to give it to them. The power had been in the manipulation, in the hidden hand, in the specific pleasure of watching beings move according to patterns they could not perceive. He had just stood up and moved his hand into the light. He carried the weight of this to the private office. He sat with it for 20 minutes. Then he began transmitting orders to the military commanders, and the orders were clear and direct and designed to actually accomplish the objective of containing and eliminating the Wa threat, and they were the orders of a man who had stopped trying to win a war and had started trying to win a battle. It felt like failure. It felt effective. He was not certain which feeling he preferred. The Council's realization. Yoda called an emergency council meeting because the reports from all 4 WOG theaters were converging on the same conclusion, and he wanted to hear it articulated in the presence of every major Jedi general simultaneously, so that the weight of the realization would land on all of them at once. Anakin came late, moving with the specific exhaustion of someone who had been in combat for 14 hours and was running on stimulants and stubbornness. Obi-Wan came with the precise clarity that came from careful meditation and analysis. Mace came with the specific tightness in his bearing that indicated he had already arrived at the conclusion and was waiting for the council to catch up. Yoda looked at them. "New information," he said. "From Buzzgob the Weird Boy, reports captured from Ork communications. Analyzed it, I have." He displayed the data on the chamber's central projection. It showed the Watts field's growth curve. Not linear, not exponential in the classical mathematical sense. Something else. Something that accelerated as more orcs arrived, because more orcs meant more fighting, meant more field intensity, meant more attraction to the field for new orcs arriving through the rifts. The curve was becoming asymptotic. "The field is scaling," Mace said. The flat confirmation of someone who had already understood this on a tactical level. "Yes," Yoda said. "Growing, the field continues. At current rate of growth, in 4 weeks, the field will have expanded to affect force sensitivity across an entire galactic sector." Anakin looked at the projection. "Sector-wide," he said. "Yes," Yoda said. "That means in 4 weeks, every Jedi in the sector will experience the same disruption you experience at close range to the Dover. WOG now." The Council absorbed this. "That's not a tactical problem," Obi-Wan said slowly. "That's a strategic problem. If the field reaches that scale, you can't use the Force to sense anything across an entire sector. You're flying blind." "Precisely," Yoda said. "And then the other says grow as well. In 3 months, in 4, the combined fields might expand to affect entire regions. In 6 months." He did not finish. He did not need to. The math was clear enough that finishing was unnecessary. Mace stood. "We need to end this faster than 3 months," he said. "Yes," Yoda said. "Which means escalating our military response beyond sustainable levels. Which means casualties that will test the clone army's capacity. Which means..." He stopped. He looked at Anakin. "What does this mean for the individual Jedi?" Anakin said. Yoda looked at him. "Means," Yoda said carefully, "that in 4 weeks, you will not have the Force as a tool in combat. You will have only your training, your instinct, your physical capability." Anakin felt the weight of this. "I fought without the Force," Mace said, his voice carrying the specific weight of someone who had just realized something in real time. "When I engaged the war boss on Felucia, I thought I was losing, and then I realized I was not losing. I was just fighting, not using the Force to enhance the fight, fighting." He looked at Yoda. "That's not impossible," Mace said. "It's just different." "Different it is," Yoda agreed, "but different for 4 weeks is manageable. Different for 4 months across an entire region, different becomes insufficient." One quote. The Council sat with this. "We need to kill the war bosses," Obi-Wan said. "All 4 of them. If we can eliminate the primary field generators, Urgok and the other 3, the field will collapse." "Agreed," Mace said, "but they're defended by armies of thousands. Getting to a war boss is going to cost us everything we have, and might not produce victory. Then we coordinate with the Separatists, Anakin said. They have intelligence on Ork positions. They have forces that can be committed. If we hit all 4 war bosses simultaneously, we would need Separatist cooperation at a level that requires explicit agreement to coordinate, Yoda said. Which means, he looked at Obi-Wan. Means you go to Dooku, Obi-Wan said. Make the request directly. Yoda nodded once. Will you go? He said to Obi-Wan. Yes, Obi-Wan said. Take no guards, Yoda said. Go as messenger, not as warrior. This must be a genuine request, not a military maneuver disguised as negotiation. Obi-Wan nodded. He stood. He left the council chamber. Behind him, Anakin watched him go and felt the specific weight of knowing what his former master was walking into. Dooku was Palpatine's apprentice in ways that only a very few people understood. Walking into a meeting with Dooku was walking into a meeting with the dark side itself, dressed in the clothes of a count, and carrying the specific seduction of someone who had spent decades convincing himself that compromise was the only honest response to a corrupt galaxy. Anakin did not like Obi-Wan's chances if the negotiation went wrong. He said nothing. He sat with Yoda and the other council members and looked at the projection of the Wa field's growth curve and understood that in 4 weeks, every certainty the Jedi had about their place in the galaxy was going to change. Anakin's second engagement. He found Urgok on the 3rd day after the council meeting, on a world called Drongar where the Separatist military had made a final stand and the Orks were in the process of overrunning it. Anakin was there to perform an extraction, get the remaining Separatist survivors out before the Orks finished consolidating the territory. It should have been a surgical operation. It became an encounter. Urgok saw him from across the battlefield. The war boss was large enough that his presence was visible at distance, a being 4 meters tall wearing crude armor that was covered in the evidence of 300 years of continuous warfare. He looked at Anakin and made the sound that Orks made when they identified something worth fighting. Anakin could have extracted his people. He could have avoided the encounter. He did not. He walked toward Urgok instead, leaving his extraction team to complete their mission without him, because there was something in the fact of meeting this being that mattered more than the extraction mission, and he understood on some level that this was the specific thing that the anger in him had been pointing toward. The anger that Palpatine had been cultivating. The anger that the Force wanted him to be aware of but not consumed by. The anger that in response to the Wa field's interference had started to become something else. Not dark side anger, just anger. The simple primary emotion of a being who was tired of not understanding what he was fighting, and who wanted to fight something he could understand completely. Urgok walked to meet him. They met in the space between the continuing battle and the extraction point. "Da, angry one," Urgok said. His voice was happy. "Been looking for you." "I know," Anakin said. "The scars gave it away." Urgok looked at the scars Anakin had given him. He looked satisfied. "Good scars," he said. "You made them right. Dey hurt for a long time after the fight ended. That's how you know they're good scars." Anakin looked at him. At this being who did not have ideology, did not have ambition beyond the next fight, did not have any of the complicated motivations that made people difficult to understand, just fight, and the absolute clarity of the commitment. "Why are you here?" Anakin said. "Why are you?" Urgok said. "Same answer probably." "The Republic sent me." "The clones sent me," Urgok said. "Or the Wog sent me. I don't know which. Days are the same thinging anyway. The fight is where I'm supposed to be." Anakin looked at him. "Do you ever think about why?" Anakin said. Urgok looked at him with the expression of someone encountering a genuinely novel concept. "Why what?" Urgok said. "Why you fight? What it's for?" Urgok considered. "It's for da fight," he said. "That's the whole thing. There ain't nothing under it. It's all surface, and the surface is all fightiness." Anakin looked at him. And in that moment, with the battle continuing around them, and the extraction team completing their mission 30 meters away, and the Wa field pressing down on his force sensitivity like a weight, Anakin understood something about himself that he had been running from since he was a slave boy on Tatooine. He wanted to be what Urgok was, not the Ork part, the part that was satisfied with the doing, because the doing was enough. The part that did not need external justification. The part that had looked at the universe and decided, this is what I am, this is what I want, and the two being the same thing is complete. He reached for his lightsaber. Urgok reached for his weapon. They met in the space between extraction and battle, and fought like two beings who had nothing else they needed to be, except exactly what they were in that moment. It lasted 3 minutes. Anakin was faster. Anakin was trained. Anakin had the Force, even disrupted, even interfered with, giving him the edge that a lifetime of training could produce. He cut, and Urgok bled, and the bleeding was good, because it meant the fight was real, and the reality was what mattered. He disarmed Urgok's weapon. He put his lightsaber against the warboss's chest. He could kill him. This was the moment where one side of the fight decided to be the side that ended it. Urgok looked at him. "Good fight," Urgok said. "Best one yet." Anakin looked at him and made the decision that separated him from the dark side in a way that no amount of Jedi training had ever managed. He lowered his lightsaber. "Not done," Anakin said. Urgok grinned. "Not even close," Urgok said. Anakin turned and ran back to his extraction team. Behind him, Urgok watched him go and made a sound of pure satisfaction. He had found it. The fight worth having, the opponent worth meeting again, the thing that made the whole Wa valuable. He looked at the battlefield. There were other fights to attend to, but the angry Jedi would be in his thoughts for a very long time. Obi-Wan's negotiation. Obi-Wan arrived at the Separatist command post on Felucia with no guards, and with the specific courage of a man who had decided to trust in his own competence to survive a meeting with a Sith Lord. Dooku received him in a room that was half Separatist command center and half Sith-aligned private office. The specific duality of a man serving two masters and managing the contradiction through the precise architectural arrangement of his physical space. "Master Kenobi," Dooku said. His voice carried the warmth that a predator carried when addressing prey that had walked willingly into proximity. "To what do I owe this visit?" "We need to coordinate on the Y threat," Obi-Wan said. He sat without being invited to sit because standing required too much energy when the conversation was going to be long and difficult. "Specifically, we need to eliminate the 4 primary war bosses simultaneously. Your forces have intelligence on 3 of them. Republic forces have intelligence on Urgok. If we coordinate a multi-front assault." "You are asking the Separatists to ally with the Republic," Dooku said. "Openly, definitively, without the plausible deniability that has allowed both of us to manage this conflict at a sustainable level." "Yes," Obi-Wan said. Dooku looked at him. "Why should I do this?" he said. "Because the Orks are not a military problem," Obi-Wan said. "They are an existential problem. The Wa field is scaling. In 4 weeks it will affect force sensitivity across an entire sector. In 4 months it will affect entire regions. Eventually it will affect the whole galaxy." Obi-Wan looked at Dooku. "At that point, the distinction between Republic and Separatist becomes irrelevant. We are not fighting about the same things anymore. We are fighting for survival." Dooku's expression did not change. "And the Chancellor authorized you to offer this alliance," he said. "Yes," Obi-Wan said. This was partially true. Yoda had authorized the request for coordination. Palpatine had authorized the military response. The specific alliance between Separatist and Republic at the operational level was something that existed in the space between the 2 authorizations. Not fully authorized, but not prohibited. Dooku understood this. He understood that Obi-Wan was walking a line and was doing it with the specific grace of someone who knew the line was there and was balancing on it anyway. "The Separatists will coordinate," Dooku said, "for 30 days, focused exclusively on Wa elimination. At the end of 30 days, this coordination ends, and we return to the war as it was." "Agreed," Obi-Wan said. Dooku looked at him. "You understand what Palpatine is doing," Dooku said. It was not a question. He is using the Orks as a variable that he cannot control to force himself to admit that there are limits to manipulation, Obi-Wan said. He is choosing honest victory over managed conflict, because managed conflict is no longer possible. Dooku's expression shifted. It was a small shift, the smallest possible acknowledgement that Obi-Wan had understood something true. "The Chancellor is not what you believe him to be," Dooku said carefully. "I know," Obi-Wan said, "but right now, what he is someone who wants to win, and that is what matters." Dooku nodded once. "I will transmit the warboss locations and intelligence," he said. "The assault can launch in 7 days." Obi-Wan stood. "Thank you," he said. Dooku looked at him with the expression of something that had just realized it had been outmaneuvered by someone it had underestimated. "You are welcome," he said. Obi-Wan left. Behind him, Dooku sat with the knowledge that the Separatists were now going to actually help the Republic win, and that this coordination was going to cost him something in terms of plausible deniability when Palpatine asked him to explain his role in the outcome. He made a note in his private records. Then he began preparing the assault plan. The clone question, spreading. Rex's question about purpose was spreading through the clone ranks because clones shared information the way they shared breath. Directly, immediately, without the filtering that biological soldiers used. In the barracks on a world called Megiddo, a trooper named Cut was sitting with a clone named Gregor who had been fighting for 3 years and had developed the specific weight that 3 years of continuous casualty produced. "They just fight," Cut was saying. "That's all they do. Fight and they're happy." "We fight," Gregor said, "but we question it," Cut said. "We want to know why. We want to know what it's for." "They don't. They just do it." Gregor was quiet. "Maybe that's our advantage," Gregor said finally. "We're unhappy about it, which means we think about it, which means we get better at it. They just do it, which means they stay at the same level." "Is that an advantage?" Cut said. "Or is it just exhaustion dressed up in philosophy?" Gregor did not answer. Because the answer was that he did not know, and was not certain you could know, and was not certain that knowing mattered when the fighting continued regardless. On 5 different worlds across the Wa theaters, variations of this conversation were happening simultaneously. Clone troopers, designed for one purpose, developing thoughts about purpose itself. Soldiers becoming people. And not certain whether the becoming was an improvement or a complication or both simultaneously. The specific weight of this question was going to affect the assault when it came. Because soldiers who questioned what they were fighting for fought differently than soldiers who simply obeyed. Better, in some ways, hesitant in others. The difference was going to matter.
Picture this for a second. Thousands of clone troopers, Jedi, and Separatist force charging across 4 battlefields at once, while a roaring green tide is waiting for them. That's where this story is about to go.
The assault launched at dawn across 4 different star systems simultaneously. Not dawn in the conventional sense, dawn in the military sense, the specific moment when coordinated operations begin and the previous phase of the war becomes historical. On Christophsis, Anakin led a strike team directly toward Urgok's position. The team consisted of elite clone troopers, 3 other Jedi generals whose names would be in the reports but whose significance would be secondary to what happened next, and the specific knowledge that this was going to either work completely or fail catastrophically with no middle ground. On Felucia, Mace Windu coordinated with Separatist forces under Dooku's command, the 2 of them speaking on a shared tactical channel for the first time in the war, their voices carrying the specific formality of enemies forced to trust each other temporarily. On Umbara, Obi-Wan moved against the second largest war boss, a being called Scrag, who had been consuming Separatist territory with the same enthusiasm that Urgok was consuming Republic territory. On a 4th world called Agamar, a Jedi general named Depa Billaba led the assault against the 3rd war boss, coordinating with Separatist commanders who had received Dooku's orders to cooperate fully. The assault was not subtle. It was not designed to be. Subtlety required that you did not want your opponent to know you were coming. The assault wanted the war bosses to know. The assault wanted them to respond. Because a war boss responding to an assault was a war boss that was focused on the immediate threat and not on the broader wah. And a war boss whose attention was narrowly focused was a war boss that was vulnerable to the specific precise violence that Republic military and Separatist coordination could produce when they actually worked together. Urgok felt the assault begin. Not through any communication system, through the ground. Through the specific vibration that 10,000 soldiers moving with unified purpose produced when they moved toward you with the intention of ending your existence. He stood. He looked at the ridge where the assault was coming from. He looked at Graka. "They are comin'," Urgok said. "Yeah," Graka said. He was in the middle of taking apart another Republic weapon system and did not look up. "Been waitin' for dis." "Should be worried," Urgok said, but it was not a question, and Graka did not treat it as one. Urgok moved to meet the assault. The angry Jedi was in the vanguard. Urgok could feel him through the specific way that beings moved when they had decided something mattered enough to stake everything on it. The Jedi was moving like someone who was no longer uncertain about what he was fighting for. The Jedi was moving like someone who had looked at the orcs and had found, in the looking, the answer to his own question. They hit each other on the slope of a ridge overlooking the Crystal City. This time there was no time for conversation. This time it was combat in its purest form. Two beings who understood what they were, what they wanted, and what the confrontation between them required. Anakin was faster. The Force, even interfered with, even disrupted by the Waas field, still gave him the edge of anticipation. He moved like something that knew what was coming before it arrived. Urgok was larger, stronger, carried 300 years of accumulated combat experience. He moved like something that had survived everything because he understood that survival was not about avoiding damage but about accepting it and continuing anyway. They fought across the ridge. Anakin's lightsaber cut and Urgok bled. Urgok's weapon swung and Anakin moved just barely far enough to miss catastrophic damage. The specific geometry of a fight between two beings who were each the best at what they were. Mace, on Felucia, was having an almost identical experience. His opponent was a war boss called Grognak, who was slightly smaller than Urgok, but compensated through the specific ugliness of what he did with violence. Mace's blade moved through precise patterns, and Grognak's weapon met him, and the meeting points produced sparks that lit the Felucia darkness in brief flashes. Beside him, Dooku was engaged with Grognak's second-in-command, and the two of them were producing a dance that was almost elegant in its specific brutality. The precision of a trained Sith fighter meeting the raw capability of an orc knob. Obi-Wan, on Umbara, was facing Scrag with the specific calm that Umbara's eternal darkness had apparently instilled in him. His blade reflected the bioluminescent light of Umbara's native life, and he moved through the darkness like someone who had learned that light was not necessary to see if you could trust yourself completely. Depa Billaba was in close engagement with the fourth war boss on Agamar, and the specifics of her engagement were producing a situation where Jedi and Separatist and Orc were all dancing in the same space, none of them fully aware of the others because the fight was occupying all available attention. "The Wa," Field responded. Buzzgob felt it happening, and tried to stop it, and found that stopping was no longer within his capacity to manage. The field was too large, too concentrated. The assault on four war bosses simultaneously was producing a specific kind of psychic pressure that the orcs were translating into the field at a scale that had no precedent. The field began to discharge, not deliberately, the way a dam discharged when the pressure became too much for the structure to contain. Raw waf. Energy blasted outward in directions that had no tactical significance and every psychological one. On Christophsis, the field blast hit the clone assault line and knocked half the troopers off their feet. The disruption to their neural implants was immediate and total. For a moment, 30 seconds, a minute, every clone trooper on that line was absolutely alone in their own head, with no communication to command, no coordination with their unit, no context for what was happening. They kept fighting anyway. Because stopping was not part of the equation. Anakin felt the blast hit his force sensitivity like a physical thing. It knocked him backwards, and Urgok advanced, and Anakin moved on pure instinct, because instinct was all he had now, and the instinct was enough. He cut. Urgok fell. Not dead. Orcs did not die easily. Urgok had been cut severely enough that the wound took the edge off his combat effectiveness, took the specific physical advantage that he carried. Urgok looked down at the wound and looked at Anakin, and made the sound of an orc acknowledging a good fight concluded. "Good one," Urgok said. His voice was weaker, but the satisfaction was intact. "Best yet." Anakin stood over him with his lightsaber raised, and did not bring it down. "Live," Anakin said, "and we fight again." Urgok looked at him. Then he started laughing. It was not a human laugh. It was the deep rumbling sound of something that had just understood something, and found the understanding hilarious. "Yeah," Urgok said. "Yeah, we do." On the other fronts, the story was repeating with variations. Mace stood over Grognak with victory within reach, and did not take it, because Mace was beginning to understand what Anakin had understood. The victory over the orcs was not in eliminating them. The victory was in surviving them. The victory was in continuing. Obi-Wan, in the darkness of Umbara, had cut Scrag severely enough that the war boss was no longer combat effective, and made the decision that mercy was a form of strength. Depa, on Agamar, stood among the chaos and realized that the assault was producing a specific outcome that had not been planned for. The war bosses were being defeated, but not eliminated, which meant the Wa field was contracting but not collapsing, which meant the situation was changing but was not resolving. Then Dooku made contact with Urgok. Not through military channels, through a direct approach, a Separatist representative moving through the chaos of the battle toward the fallen war boss, with the specific courage of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain from the attempt. Urgok looked at him. "Duck cold one," Urgok said, "back for more." "Count Dooku," the representative said, moving with the careful precision of someone approaching a being who could kill him with a single movement, and was hoping that the being would not. "I am authorized to speak for the Separatist military. We want to propose something." Urgok looked at him. Anakin, who had been about to check on his extraction team, stopped. He watched. "We want a ceasefire," the representative said. 30 days. The Orks cease all aggressive action against Separatist territory. In exchange, the Separatists withdraw all forces from Republic-held territory and provide the Orks with specific target locations: Republic military installations, clone trooper concentration camps, Jedi operational bases. Urgok looked at the representative. The representative looked back. Anakin felt his understanding of the situation shift in real time. Dooku was attempting to use the Orks as a military tool against the Republic. Dooku was attempting to do exactly what Palpatine had realized was impossible, to manipulate the Orks toward a specific strategic objective. Dooku was going to fail, because Orks did not respond to strategic objectives. Orks responded to fights. Urgok sat up despite his wounds. "You're offering me targets," Urgok said. "Places to fight." "Yes," the representative said. "Specific places. Republic places." "Yes." Urgok looked at him. "What if I want to fight you instead?" Urgok said. The representative's face did something complicated. "The Separatists would prefer that you did not," the representative said carefully. "But you'd fight if I wanted," Urgok said. "Yes." Urgok looked at Anakin. Then he looked back at the representative. "Tell the cold one," Urgok said, "that I appreciate the offer, but I got what I came for." He looked at his wound. This was good. This was the kind of wound that took time to heal, and that he would carry, and that would remind him of the angry Jedi every day until it was gone. "I got a good fight. I got a worthy opponent. I got scars worth keeping." He looked at the representative. "That's enough. Tell him Dawag stays where it is, consolidates, enjoys what it's got." The representative looked at him. "You are declining the Separatist offer," the representative said. "Yeah," Urgok said. "I am." The representative walked backward, keeping his eyes on Urgok in case the war boss changed his mind about whether the representative was worth fighting, and returned to Dooku's position. On the tactical channel, Dooku received the report. He received it with the specific expression of someone who had just learned something true about the universe that violated his fundamental assumptions. Mace, hearing the exchange, understood what had happened. The Separatists had attempted to manipulate the Orks, and the Orks had rejected the manipulation, not because it was invalid, but because it was irrelevant. The Orks had what they wanted: territory to hold, enemies to fight, the prospect of continuing conflict. They did not need Dooku's strategic objectives because the fighting was the objective. Palpatine, receiving reports of the Separatist negotiation attempt, understood what this meant. The Separatists had just demonstrated that the Orks could not be weaponized. Dooku had just confirmed through attempted action what the Republic had learned through combat. The Orks were not a tool, they were a force. Forces could be directed by confronting them, by surviving them, by continuing to exist in proximity to them, but they could not be used. Yoda, in the Jedi Temple, received the data from all four fronts and sat with the specific clarity of someone who had just watched his order survive its first genuine test against something outside its experience. The Jedi had not won. The Orks had not lost. What had happened instead was the beginning of something else, a specific stalemate where the Jedi understood they could not eliminate the Orks, and the Orks understood they had found opposition worth continuing to engage with. A standoff between two forces that were not opposed so much as positioned parallel to each other. Anakin stood over Urgok and made the decision that was going to echo forward through everything that followed. He deactivated his lightsaber. He extended his hand. Urgok looked at it. He took it. Anakin pulled him up.
I'm gonna be honest, this is the exact moment I genuinely had no idea where the story was going anymore. I thought I knew the ending, and then Anakin did that?
Not done, Anakin said again. Not even started, Urgok said. They looked at each other, and in that moment, the war changed. Not toward peace, not toward resolution. Toward something else, a specific reconfiguration where the Jedi and the Orks were no longer engaged in elimination, but in a kind of mutual engagement that neither side had predicted, and both sides were finding more satisfying than what had come before. Palpatine received the reports and understood that his plan had been disrupted in a way that could not be put back together. The Orks could not be eliminated quickly enough to preserve his timeline. The Republic could not be manipulated anymore because the external crisis had removed the specific leverage points that manipulation required. The war was going to continue, but in a form that he could not control. He sat with this. He began recalculating everything. The closing arrived in three forms. First, Yoda's statement to the Council. Ended this battle has, ended this war, it has not. Changed it has, in ways we do not yet understand. Prepare we must. For a new kind of conflict, for a new kind of enemy, for a new kind of alliance that we must learn to maintain with beings who do not understand our philosophy and do not need to. Second, Rex's realization as he stood in the aftermath of the assault. They don't fight for anything because they don't need to. They just are what they are and they do what they do, and that's enough. Maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's clarity. Third, and most important, the moment when Dooku reported to Palpatine, "The Orks cannot be used, my lord. They can only be managed through active opposition." Which means the war will continue, but in a form where neither side can stop the other. Which means we have created a permanent state of controlled conflict that serves no one's agenda. Palpatine heard this and made a specific decision in the privacy of his office. He was going to have to adapt. The war was going to have to become something else. The specific architecture he had built, the careful balancing act between Separatists and Republic, was going to have to evolve because the external pressure the Orks had introduced was never going to stop. He sat with this. He began to make new plans. And on 4 different worlds across the galaxy, the Orks consolidated their positions and continued being exactly what they were. Beings for whom the war was not a means to an end, but an end in itself. Urgok sat on the ridge of Christophsis and looked at the horizon where the angry Jedi had disappeared toward his extraction point, and felt the satisfaction of someone who had found exactly what he was looking for. The fight continued. The fight would always continue. And that, in the specific honest clarity that defined Ork existence, was everything.
Okay, I genuinely didn't think this story was gonna end like that. Nobody really wins, nobody really loses, and somehow the entire Clone Wars becomes something completely different. That's honestly why I love crossovers like this. They force both universes into situations their own lore never prepared them for. So now I've got to ask you, if you were standing in Anakin's place, would you have finished Urgok or made the exact same choice? Drop your answer down below because I'm reading every single one. And if you thought this crossover was crazy, wait until you see the next one. Until next time, stay curious, keep asking what if, and I'll see you in the next story.